Welcome to Shaping Agility Saturday session number 7 or 8, and I should have checked the number beforehand. We've got Eric, Saahil, Wolfgang, and myself, Mark, on the line, and somebody has a bit of an echo. No, it's gone. Welcome. Big week.
Oh, yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where we are in the world.
We're getting very good at time zone transitions.
So this was an incredible week for me. So I learned so much about large solutions and solution trains, of course, my favorite topic. But like when you think about the point where
Is that Mark trying to get Wolfgang to stretch his vulnerability muscles?
Mark pretends the sound is just to make me aware of whenever I'm talking about this topic.
It's all right, you get to talk about it a little bit.
So
He was
I mean,
apparently.
So I already have a backlog full of things which I want to incorporate in the dynamic agility material, but then a week like that added a couple of aha moments where I thought, okay, this is something that I haven't seen in that way. But then there were also like revelations which I thought, okay, this is so big, and I actually ever missed it. I couldn't express it. And so this adds to a already overfull backlog, a lot of more items that I have to create slides on or write something about it, because I think this could also be revelations for other people when they hear about that, because it was completely new for me when it happened to it just occurred like, okay, it's probably like that. Oh yeah.
So, client workshops or?
So we had the SAFe Treff in Munich with the large SAFe transformations from the German-speaking countries. And in this time, we were almost 50 people, and from a lot of different transformations. And so this was, this is always insightful. Like, this was our 6th SAFe Treff, so we do that usually 3 times a year, and you can tell we are doing that for 2 years now. And and so there are always good ideas when you are talking to the others who are really doing that on the ground floor. But this time it was different for me. There were so many things that I really hadn't had on my agenda, where I thought, oh yeah, this is something completely different than what I was thinking myself about larger transformations. And so this time I really had a lot of items on my backlog at the end of the meeting where I thought, okay, I have to write something about it in one form or another.
Nice. So, just a one-day event?
A one-day event. So yeah, we are. If you arrive a day earlier, then we have an evening gathering at a local pub where we talk for 2 or 3 hours in the evening. But the event itself is a one-day event from 9 o'clock in the morning or 8:30 if you want to have coffee, until about 5 or 5:30.
And do they run it with speakers or as an unconference, or what kind of format do you use?
So we tried out different things, and we actually start with a keynote from. So it's a round robin thing. Like, every company who wants to host that can host that, and and of course they pay a bit for that, because they have to reserve a room, and also usually we get lunch there for free. And so the company which invites us usually has a keynote for half an hour. Then we have a fishbowl discussion with all the people there about the topic of the keynote. Then we usually have 2 lightning talks of 15 minutes each, and after the lightning talks, we have open space sessions for the lightning talks themselves and also for other topics. And then there's a lunch break. Then there are another 2 15-minute lightning talks and open space sessions after that. And then we have a closing retrospective, and we see where we want to go next. So who is hosting the next event and who will be in the organization team for the next event and things like that.
Nice. Be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so this was the highlight of my week, absolutely. What about your weeks?
About you, Saahil? What was your highlights of the week?
I had a great week. I can't say that I got a ton of work done. I got some reading done, which is great. And uh, I think you guys know last weekend I was on vacation in Belize with my wife. So we came back early Tuesday. And then I just spent the week reconnecting with some old colleagues that I haven't talked to in a while, just seeing what's going on in their worlds. And I scheduled a LPM overview, a custom workshop for a 1-day event next week, which I'm very excited about because now I get to sit down and look through all my LPM materials and figure out what is the most important things that I want to talk about, given that I only have 8 hours with this group. And I know that that might tie into some of the stuff we wanted to talk about today, so I'm fired up about that as well. Um, I also took my wife to Halloween Horror Nights for the first time. That was also a fun thing we did this week. If you've not familiar with Halloween Horror Nights,
I was double
it
checking that I'd
is
heard you correctly, to be honest.
yes, yeah. So it's a big event. This was the 32nd year that Universal Studios in Orlando and California, but we went to the one in Orlando, host a um, scare event where they convert the entire park into a series of haunted houses. Um, and so it opens at sundown and goes till 2 in the morning. And it's this high production horror fest.
Oh,
And
there you
they
go.
do like,
Now I've
yeah.
heard the word you're actually saying. There were
Yes,
letters
horror.
in the word that I thought you were saying, and I was just trying to put it together.
No, not. It's Halloween horror nights. Um, but they do themed stuff. So every year they like have some big tie-ins. This year they did there was a Stranger Things haunted house if you like Stranger Things on Netflix, or The Last of Us PlayStation game HBO show. They had a haunted house themed with The Last of Us, and then there was one with classic movie monsters, and they did like um, a Yeti stalking a campground, like kind of a themed event. And oh, there was one about a wizard making a deal with a dragon and it going horrible. So they're just fun. I mean, they're scary, don't get me wrong. But it's a lot of fun if you're into that. And my wife had never been, and we only live an hour away, so that was a nice little spur of the moment fun trip.
Nice.
Great.
Eric, since
So
feel like we're doing the round table of the highlights of the week.
Yeah, for me, I think the highlight is being back in Mexico and having a proper office again. Um, last week's stream I listened to from the airport and got to get the audience point of view, and setting everything up and back on my like proper monstrosity of a desktop and walking the Malecon and eating tacos and like all the normal things I do when I live here. Life is good. Professionally, this has been a book week for me. So I've made a lot of progress rewriting our first draft, especially like working to refine the story going into the first couple chapters, like that, getting the message tight, making it very clear what we're writing for who, and bringing that pure focus on the audience into the first couple chapters. Like, it's some of the slowest writing I do. Like, I think I accidentally went and read half of Escape Velocity to write one paragraph. But I'm really happy with where it's coming out. So it'll make the reshaping of the rest of the 40,000 words of draft a lot easier.
There's nothing like the rabbit hole when you go, I think this author said something about this in this book, and you scan the highlights and you didn't highlight the thing you think you're remembering. I don't know if that was
What I,
why you wound up in half of escape velocity, or whether you just went, "Hey, this is cool. I'm going to read it because I'm here."
a little bit of both, and the third one is it's the regret of physical books from long ago. That trilogy, for lack of a better word, was in my physical bookshelf that I paid forward years ago when I cleaned house. So I'm in a new Kindle edition of several of Jeffrey Moore's books now, and I knew I wanted his work on cascading new things through the portfolio and the steady flow for ISO 2 and so on. And it's like, well, I got to find the right reference to put in here. So I got to buy 3 books. Yay!
It felt like his thinking on Horizon 2 evolved quite a bit between escape velocity and zone to win.
Yes, that's an entire topic I'd love to dig into. So let's not do that as part of a roundtable check-in.
No, I did find myself pondering a bit this week the notion of an entire stream on zone to win and portfolio constructs. But
I'm in.
Sounds good to me.
so for me this week was, look, I think the only thing I can do is say the highlight was actually finally going public.
That's very exciting. Congratulations again. It feels a little self-congratulatory as well, but I think that's a big win.
Thank you. I mean, without you
Yeah,
driving
for
that
public
mark, it would never have happened. So I'm really thankful that you drove the whole thing.
It's been so much fun, and it's just like time for the next stage of the evolution. But kicking the week off with Eric going, okay, I've got my blog post drafted. What are the must fixes before we go public? A nice big backlog session to go, all right, we've got to take care of this, we've got to take care of this, we've got to take care of this. Just working the way through that. And then before I published the blog, going back and going, hang on a second, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's now happened that hadn't happened when I wrote the blog. So last minute draft updates, but it's exciting, right? Because we get to that stage where hopefully we'll start to get more interaction, more feedback, more tuning.
I think just the fact that we had someone pop in and say hello right before we started streaming is a sign that we're getting some traction, right? The community is building.
So
we've got 5 people
sorry,
watching us right now, which might be the 4 of us plus Sammy, but we've got 5 people watching us.
Well, I'm not one of them, so could be Rebecca's enjoying a bit of chatter over her morning coffee, but
like
I don't know if you guys have seen, I've actually got a streaming schedule up now on Twitch. So 10 minutes early on time's starting to become real because we went live 10 minutes late. But we've now got officially 2 shows because we've got the book club show and Saturday night session or Saturday sessions. And I was just chatting to the guys from the Prague SPCT Day follow-up earlier tonight on the work that we've been collaborating on. And I was thinking about it during the week, going, we should really just stream the stuff we're trying to assemble because it'll wind up with hopefully some very polished words in a blog series at the end, but all of the fun and probably a lot of the interesting stuff's going to happen as we shape it. So I jumped on the line we've got a call about 3.5 hours earlier than this on a Saturday for me. Jumped on it earlier tonight and said, hey, Nico and Stefan, I reckon we should be streaming these. Are you in? And they got very excited. So we didn't actually stream tonight. I thought that might be too much of a last minute shock for them, but we had our chat, and then we sat at the end and said, okay, how would this have felt if we were a stream? How does it fit? And probably particularly because the takeaway was to put some stuff out on sort of how to grow as an SPC after you've finished your 4 days in your exam. And the talks we've started to have about being a bit more mindful about different audiences and having different levels of material available. It's like, no, there we go. We've already got something we're doing, and now we just hit the stream button. And it's nice having Eric as alternate host. Next thing, we just got to get you enabled, Wolfgang.
So I'm working behind the scenes on a format for, of course, solution trains, and so
Where's
I
the noise?
But,
Did he cringe when you said the word solution train? Was he ready for it?
Meh. But I have put my backlog together, but now I have to wire together all the OBS and things behind the scenes, and this is what I reserve time for next week. So let's see how much progress I make next week on that. But when that is done, I think I could go live with that format also.
Oh, Sammy says you need to use a compressor, by the way, Wolfgang. And we figured with all the toys on your desk, you'd know what it is.
Okay, a compressor. I'm ordering just one.
You will have compressor abilities. I sat with Sammy for, I don't know, probably 25 minutes looking at the photo of your desk a little while ago. And she's just looking around going, oh, he's got that, and he's got that toy, and he's got that toy, and he's got that toy. She was very impressed, by the way. She's like,
Thank you.
yes, that is quite a setup. But because your level changes so much, as soon as you start talking about solution trains, your level doubles.
Okay, yeah. So I have to have a compressor. I haven't thought about that, but
Well, Wolfgang, do you wear like a smartwatch or anything? Have you ever looked at, does your heart rate change when you talk about solution trains?
I don't wear a smartwatch, but probably it is. It's like exciting. There are two topics in the world which I really find fascinating, and this is piano playing and solution trains. So whenever one of the topic comes up, I think my heart rate changes automatically.
Oh, wow.
So tonight, discussions. I had a look at our streaming backlog before I jumped on, and we had, pretty sure Eric was next in queue with new product value streams as a transformation tool. We were going to talk about it 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, and then it was late. We called it and we said, that's next week. And Eric went, no, I'm going to be sitting in an airport lounge. So we sat on that. So if we followed the plan would be tonight is new product value streams as a transformation tool. If we deviated from the plan, a couple of other things. Probably the short-lived one I had was knowing that the call for papers for Berlin Summit is out. Whether it's tonight or next week, I thought it would be interesting to have a chat about what we're all thinking about in terms of responses to the call for papers. I don't know if you're thinking about flights to Berlin, Eric, given your commitment to green and sustainability and reducing your flight miles, but
Yeah, I was convinced that I should probably apply and go, and inspired, and due to the nature of my 6-month tourist visa here in Mexico, I will have to go somewhere before the end of before middle of May, so it's convenient.
That lines up pretty well.
there's 3 nice broad topic streams, so there's plenty to play with. So,
Well, I could probably imagine that the Berlin conversation's not going to take too long for us to just kind of talk through what we're thinking about. We could probably do both.
I mean, to be fair, for me, they're the same topic, I think. So
well, why don't we warm up and maybe run ourselves to kind of 15, 20 minutes tops on Berlin,
Mhm.
and then we'll transition out to new product value streams as a transformation tool. So to anchor us, I'm just zooming the Miro. I have the topic threads up on the Miro, although it appears I'm alone in the stream Miro at the moment.
Oh, I'm in the backlog.
streaming.
So I hadn't even looked at what the topics were until I was sitting going, what might we talk about tonight? And I went, let me dig through my emails and see what they were. But somewhat serendipitously, the thing that had been bouncing around in my head a little bit on a couple of drives this week. Have any of you given more structured thought to potential submissions than me randomly pondering topics in the car?
Eric, do you want to start?
Oh, I told you they're the same topic. So
So maybe we leave Eric for last because he'll take us into our big topic for today. I can tell you that I don't know that I'll call it fully structured, but an idea started to take shape in my head. Last week, before I went to Belize, I was in Las Vegas for the DevOps Enterprise Summit, and I got to spend a little time with some of the framework team that was out there. And I had a really invigorating conversation with Cheryl Krupe about the human element of transformation. And she turned me on to a book and a podcast called The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. Uh, are any of you guys familiar?
yeah, she had me read that a year and a half ago. Wow.
Yeah, oh my God, it was amazing. I highly recommend it. I mean, there are some points where it can get a little esoteric. Don't get me wrong, but it was a really powerful read. So the guy who wrote it is a guy named Boyd Varty, Varty, and he grew up in South Africa. He's South African. On a It was originally his family ran a lion tracking business for hunting lions. That was started by his great grandfather. Grandfather did it, father did it, and then when he was 15, they converted it into a photography safari lion tracking business. And so he's just been running that his whole life, and he has, talks about a bunch of different experiences that he had um, while just living in South Africa tracking lions. And um, he wrote this book, The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life, talking about his how his perspective on life has changed the more in touch he gets with nature, and some specific experiences that he had. But there were, just a few things that he talked about that really stood out to me in terms of um, you're always looking for the next first step, right? He talks about when you're tracking something, unless the sign is less than an hour old, um, it's outdated. You're seeking more current relevant information. He talked about this sense of connectedness to the larger picture. He talked about it as Ubuntu, which is that African concept of oneness and unity. And my professional brain immediately thought, kind of sounds like systems thinking for the world. um, and so I just was starting to draw all these connections between the way he was talking about hunting lions and the way I manage portfolio transformation. Um, and so I've been thinking about submitting this topic around like a lion tracker's guide to portfolio or something like that as a how you can find inspiration and parallels in different parts of the world to how we need to approach the patience and um, energy of sustaining transformation. So I admit it's a little bit of a stretch, but in my brain, I'm tumbling this over and over again about there's got to be an interesting conversation to have with this as a backdrop because it's such a unique and powerful concept.
That
I
sounds cool.
almost think I have some of the exact same thoughts around the analogies of product management and line tracking. Um, when I read that book, and I was thinking of more of like the individual product level and the whole portfolio, but I mean we can split hairs over where that line is anyway.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in reality, the principles are probably the same because I'm thinking about things like you're always looking for that next first track, right? You're never thinking about the whole journey. A phrase that he says over and over again is, uh, "I don't know where I'm going, but I know how to get there."
Yeah, that principle one really hit me big time.
Eric, you got really quiet for me. I don't know if anyone else is having that issue. I can't hear you.
Mark probably turned me up, so if I lean in, it'll blow
No,
out.
no, it felt like I don't know whether you've put a gate on because it felt
I
like
just leaned back. So
it felt like
I'm at the back of my cabin. I'll move up.
that's way better now.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Um, Anyway, it's I don't know where I'm going, but I know how to get there.
Yeah, so I wanna jump on this one a little bit because like when I read that, my career mindset for at least 10 years, I can't remember exactly when I created this analogy or metaphor, but it was probably 2010, 2012, somewhere in that range. It has been modeling my career as surfing. And it's like, what do you need? You need the water, clearly. You need the skill to ride whatever wave you're going to be on, and you need the wisdom to know which wave to get on and catch, because you can't go paddling mindlessly after every wave. And those three things, like when I started reading line tracking, it's like, yeah, that's a lot of that same metaphor. Be present in the moment, be aware, be alert, traverse enough ground that you have the opportunity to see the signs, but see the signs and be ready to go where the signs take you at any given moment. And that kind of like philosophy of flow with it versus fight through it doesn't show up in a lot of how we talk about flow in a professional system. Although you could argue it's tied inherently into theory of constraints and everything like that if you wanted to dig into it.
So I totally agree, and I think that there are things that are sort of intrinsic or implied in the way we handle product transformation or portfolio transformation that are present in this conversation in that concept of your surfer analogy or lion tracking that we just have never called out. We've never made explicit, but I believe that those are things that are present in all of the successful approaches. And and I where there might still be a disconnect between the surfer and the lion tracker, um, for me is the lion tracking metaphor made it so intensely human to me, right? That so much of the transformation is based not on the practices that you put in place or the content or the context of the organization. It's just can you successfully influence the humans in this organization? And that's
Mhm.
I don't know. To me, that's it's something I also have to spin around in my brain a little bit more because I don't know that I've always been human first as much as I want to be.
But could you put the link to that book and that blog in the chat? So I would really be interested in that. This
Yes.
I,
podcast that
I,
you mentioned.
I caught the name of
Um,
it on a post-it on the Miro, so we haven't lost it if he doesn't find a link fast.
the podcast. So he just did one appearance on the Tim Ferriss show, I'm not sure who Tim Ferriss is, but when I was looking up the podcast that Cheryl
Y-
recommended, um, his guests are quite impressive. He's
Oh
had
yeah.
Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, and many other quite impressive people. Um,
I
so
will.
it seems legit. I'm putting it into. Do you want it in the lounge chat
No,
or
in stream chat.
in the
I just
stream
dropped.
chat?
I just dropped a site. I just dropped it into the stream.
There you go. It's on the stream chat.
Perfect. Um, did you drop the link to the Spotify or to the book?
So the
To the
book.
Okay, then I will add the Spotify link for the podcast. Open the chat.
I tell you what, Amazon has done very well out of shaping agility. The number of books that I have bought based on random references over the last few months.
I full credit to Cheryl on this one. I had never heard of this, and I listened to the podcast on my flight to Belize, and I bought the book when I landed because I was really impressed.
You get a lovely talk thread out of something like that, because if you think about it, your model for the talk is going to be a series of metaphoric links from the book and cool photos.
Yeah, well, I'm already. But part of what I was envisioning in my head, because when I went on my honeymoon earlier this year, we went on safari. I have this really cool video of a lion walking straight up to me, and so I was thinking maybe I'll just end the session with that video and be like, and sometimes it all just works out, you know. Sometimes the lion comes to you.
I know I had 2 or 3 years where I was thinking about building talks using the metaphors from Lewis Carroll. Like I just
Sorry, in
had
my head, I heard C.S. Lewis and was like, Narnia.
Alice in Wonderland. If you think about
Oh,
the Mad Hatter, the Cheshire Cat, and the metaphors for each of those key characters that he had, the number of talks that you could build by just working your way through those characters would be a lot of fun. But I must confess, the first thought that came into my head when you said The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life was a talk. I forget who gave it. It was one of the more provocative guys at an Agile Alliance conference a few years ago, where the thread of it was different types of animal scat, including elephant, rhinoceros, and the image for every transition was a different pile of elephant, like animal scat, and then a link back to your Agile journey. And I didn't go to the talk, but it was one of the most talked about presentations at that conference. And then it turned up for me because I was in a group playing elephant karaoke. Not elephant karaoke, PowerPoint karaoke. And they had this deck on random shuffle PowerPoint karaoke that had like 2,000 slides from random Agile conference presentations. And they'd seeded every single slide from his talk into it. And if you're not familiar with PowerPoint karaoke, you get a random topic, you get auto advancing slides, and you've got to try and give a 5-minute talk on a random topic while you have very random slides appearing behind you. And the number of hilarious moments that we had when people had one of these animal scat slides appear behind them and they tried to link it into their lightning talk was good fun.
I think we just identified a future shaping agility happy hour activity.
Oh yeah.
I'm in.
I'm in. That sounds awesome.
It is.
Can't
it
be
is-
any worse than doing our 7-minute sessions at Immersion Week.
I played a different version where made people talk on random. I just grabbed a random slide out of one of the training decks and made them just try to flow with it.
Oh, awesome.
Your slides are out of order. Go.
We did it in, and they had it. You know how Agile Alliance has the kind of open space area, and I found by the time I went to the last couple, I spent more time in the open space area than anywhere else for the whole conference, because that was where all the best conversations happened. I remember Rachel Weston Rowell would regularly turn up and do the theatre stuff. Having a mental, like the craziness she would put people through. But I'm sitting watching this PowerPoint karaoke, and their intro to it was, there's so much public speaking, like holding a microphone and speaking in front of groups of people involved in agility, that somebody dreamed this up as a way to use it in retros to help people get over their fear of public speaking. And the notion was, give them a challenge where it was basically impossible to give a good presentation. And then, having been through 5 minutes of people laughing their heads off at you, it's way less scary. So I watched it for 45 minutes, laughing my head off. And I went, I can't have just sat here gratuitously watching. I better volunteer to do one. Just as I volunteer to do one, the sessions that have been running close, and all of a sudden that area fills up with massive crowds. And so it's not this small group of 40 people who've built trust with and vulnerability with each other. It's this massive crowd of people. And I look up and it's like, whatever, right? I'm committed now. I've got to give back. And I get a weird topic, because they were all weird topics people wrote on index cards. I get some weird slides, and I crack into it. And nobody knows what's really happening except that I'm giving this highly dysfunctional talk into a microphone. And then I finish and I walk off, and M's waiting for me with a prospective client.
Oh.
So she's got off, she's been talking to this guy going, we really need some help with our Australian operation. And M said, you should come and meet my partner. And it's like, yeah, made a great first impression on that potential client. However.
Did you win the client?
No, we didn't win the client. I'm not sure that it was the fault of PowerPoint karaoke, but I've used it heaps for gamification sessions with clients. Run it a couple of times at conferences. Llewellyn Falco put a slide automation shuffler sequencer app up on GitHub, so it's pretty easy to get your hands on. However, we digress. This was meant to be a quick transition. Wolfgang, what thoughts have you had?
So I actually work on 4 different proposals for talks. But of course, I know that I can only hand in 2, but I'm working with different clients on that, and so others might become customer stories, which I'm not proposing, but they are handing in. And so the one is. So this is the working title is in German, but I'm translating it on the fly here. Create a network organization to solve complex problems in the automotive industry with the help of SAFe. So which actually means we have, in this speech, we have 3 levels of stable organizational structures, meaning you have like the regulatory frame around the whole organization, where you have to comply to certain regulatory requirements. Then you have the solution trains as a stable structure in the solution areas. And how do they work together? So this is with one company that I'm working on that topic. Another that I'm working on is the art of ad hoc structures, how this large company sets up solution trains for fast reactivity. And this is something that I'm really keen on writing. So, because everyone actually talks about ad hoc structures. Like you have a problem, you bring all the product owners, product managers, whoever cares for that problem together, or architects or whoever. But there is a certain art behind setting up ad hoc structures, and it also relies always on the structures that you have there in the first place. And so this is what I'm working with another company on that. And then with the third company, I'm working on a talk about a framework for LACE teams, like similar to a Scrum guide for development teams. Like how would a Scrum guide, so to speak, for LACE teams look like? What are the rules that LACE teams should go by? And the fourth talk is about hybrid trainings and hybrid PI plannings. So just like technical stuff. So what should you consider like technically when you are planning for a hybrid training or a hybrid PI planning? Like what should you have in place? What is really necessary? What is good to have, and things like that. So this is just a real practical thing.
So the first three you mentioned, you're working with clients on them. Would you do something similar to what you did in Prague this year and co-present with the client so that you can kind of lift the lid on the reality version instead of the theory version? Or are you, what's your thought process?
Yeah, probably. I mean, with all the three things like network structures, ad hoc structures, and this LACE team framework or LACE team working structures, we had a lot of material that we created over the past years, I would say, and it was never published in a forum, but it was never like high on the priority list. But now with all the three topics, there are other companies who are interested in, like when we are talking at the SAFe Tref about what are you working on, and I'm sharing what I'm working on, and it seems that other companies are now also coming to that stage in their evolution of their transformation, saying, "Oh, this is interesting. I need that." So I hadn't had the necessity to write that up because nobody was really interested in that, like write it up publicly. And so now all the three topics were topics where other companies also had an interest in. And then I thought, okay, why not making a public speech out of that, or a blog post or whatever? And so let's see what they want us to talk about at the SAFe Summit. But I think all the three topics would be interesting from like a practical point of view, saying, hey, these are the things that we had good experiences with. And when we tried that out, and maybe you find something interesting for you as well.
So they're all for, you're really putting them under lean agile practices across the enterprise in terms of the
Yeah, probably.
thread structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they will probably not just be talks that I will upload, but also customer stories where I'm just a side note.
Yeah. 4 topics. Man, I wish I'd been able to come up with more than one. And it's definitely
What did you
not.
come up with, Mark?
So my working title, which is going to need work, is instead of launching arts and extending to the portfolio, launch portfolios and extend to arts.
I think that sounds like a natural evolution of where we started to go when we said portfolio transformation is an enabler for successful SAFe transformation. So sorry, I cut you off. You should keep talking, and then I will agree with you.
I don't mind you agreeing with me fast.
He just wrote the blank check. He'll agree with whatever you say next, Mark.
Well, this is my first test of it as a summit concept. Right? I dreamed it up in my head. I went, yeah, I like this. But it ties back to the thread, I guess, that happened at the Fellows Retreat. There was a bit of discussion about, there was a session on how would the implementation roadmap evolve in a new version, and that became quite a provocative session in terms of various suggestions people had. But one of the common threads was that more and more people are talking about beginning with portfolio as opposed to beginning with trains. And my LPM boot camp, that's very fresh in my head right now, was very much premised on you may or may not be doing SAFe yet, and you may or may not intend to do SAFe, but start where you are with portfolio. And my argument is that because the portfolio gives you a vehicle for systems thinking, it means that when the moment comes that you pick and launch trains, you've got a lot of data and strategic insight that's driving that decisioning. So you're more likely to get good starting points than when you take a kind of bottom-up view of launch trains, stitch trains together.
Sounds great to me. I would love to have a talk on that. I mean, listen to a talk on that.
Eric's looking very thoughtful. I'm waiting for the prod here.
I'm like putting a whole new topic on the streaming backlog based on what you just said. Because I'm drawing three things together from different conversations. One is our fifth discipline conversation and discipline-led or competence-led. One is a conversation I had with a let's just say she's a well-recognized leader in the general Agile community, not in the SAFe community in the slightest. And we're talking about the minimum set of competencies necessary to achieve business agility in a company. And I was like, oh, we've got a picture of that. And then I was really, I've just been playing with this for ever since the picture existed, to be honest, but the overview format of the big picture and the competency first view of SAFe. And I've just been playing this for a long time around how do we lead into a start where you are competency driven approach to SAFe, which is what I'm saying is like, oh, if our access and our energy is at the portfolio, what does it look like to enter there into the rest of the system? 7 years ago, we really only had director level, train level entries. Like we didn't have the permission to play at the portfolio level as a community yet. And we had to earn that on a client by client basis. So of course all the leverage was train everyone, launch trains. And I've seen glimmers of clients and companies that are starting to lean in from lean out of leadership and continuous learning as their entry point. I've worked with customers that came in from, we did some really incredible stuff with lean thinking in our operations space. How do we apply that to IT? And it's almost organizational agility in.
Yep.
Product transformations are on the way. Better products and pulling through the engineering habits and everything else. So I can make a case that any of the seven competencies, seven competencies could be the entry point.
Yep.
And there's probably a transformation pattern that is similar to the implementation roadmap we could extract from each one. Because if you, arguably the implementation roadmap says, start with team and technical agility and then pull everything else in. What are the other six? And you seem to have that slide ready to share.
Well, I wasn't sure where tonight would go. And in case we wound up on the LPM bootcamp, I had a few key slide extracts from the LPM bootcamp. And this is like the second last slide of my What is Lean Portfolio Management. You'd probably recognize these words, Eric. But it was, and if you tie it again back to the Fellows Retreat, and that's an interesting one of start with any competency, you can build some fascinating patterns with that. The notion that came out in the Fellows Retreat, which got really challenging when we played with implementation roadmaps, was that we all basically said you've got to figure out where you are. And knowing where you are tells you where to start on your roadmap. And that when it was first conceived, it was a world where there was a fairly common starting point, which was by and large a waterfall organization. And today's a much more varied landscape in terms of starting points.
Mhm.
But it would require some interesting surgery on the competency.
In which way?
Not so much on the top level framing. We were chatting about this earlier tonight with Nico and Stefan, because the topic came up of it's so much nicer to start with the competency view than the big picture
Mhm.
in terms of framing the conversation, right? And you're working your way
Well,
in.
that's a much better story.
But if you dig under the topics at the moment, the way most of the competencies are framed, they're like a navigation path into the specific practices. So there's quite a tight coupling in a lot of the competencies between the competency and the practice.
Mhm.
Where I think if you are truly doing a competency and starting path approach, you'd have to loosen the coupling between the competency and the practices in the big picture.
But I don't know that I agree with that. But maybe my source of disagreement is in the conceptual click through versus the literally what's behind the words. If I click the things on the big picture,
I think there's a conceptual click through, beautiful. I think the click through at the moment's more than conceptual. Because it's so wide into SAFe really at the moment to go start with essential SAFe. And a competency-based entry point says actually you're probably quite often not going to start with essential SAFe. You might start somewhere completely different, and you'll find places where essential SAFe is the answer.
Wouldn't a competency-based view just say start with team and technical agility?
Only if you start in the team and technical agility competence.
yeah, like circular
I'm
argument.
just
That's what the
messing with
implementation.
you about essential SAFe, right? Like you could just start with essential SAFe by saying we're going to start with team and technical agility
Yeah.
as a competency, and then you're starting with essential SAFe. That it was a joke. I'm sorry. I'm not funny.
I get the joke now.
Yeah, I'm looking through the competency articles.
Yep.
And I'm not seeing the direct linkage that you're talking about. The second click for sure. Like the second click very quickly gets to the big picture, essentially.
Yep.
But like each of the 7 competency articles is, well, what do you need to do to get better with coordinating with trains and suppliers? And I've had plenty of change efforts where by smoothing the relationship and building better connections between a key vendor and the company's employees, like the transformation piece was done. The rest of it was just cleaning up the teams and trains.
Yep.
Yeah. Starting with the things that are most impeding your success from a competency view, I don't think it rushes to practices except for the practices that support improving that element.
Would SAFe argue that all of the practices in the big picture support one competency or another? I don't think they would say that there isn't something on the big picture that doesn't improve one of the competencies.
Everything should exist in order to improve one or more competencies, typically more. In fact, back in class 1 and 2, we had to defend the linkage between any practice and the values and the core principles, which is kind of the same thing. Once you click the competencies or a lens around the principles.
I
This
suspect
is why I said it's a whole topic.
it is a whole topic, and I'm going to avoid the rabbit hole. But I think that'll be a fun topic.
It's on the backlog.
Add it to the backlog.
So zooming back out of it, and back on topic. Where was the frame? SAFe Summit Berlin. So yeah, that's me. Start with portfolio, extend to the art. And I haven't thought of a backup. So all my eggs are in one basket.
I mean, hey, I'm in the same position. But man, it sounds like there's a lot of overlap between what we've been thinking about, not just the portfolio to Lion Tracker, but also product to portfolio. And I mean, Wolfgang's got 4 topics, so there's got to be overlap in there. If we at some point want to consider joint sessions as opposed to all doing our own thing, I think there's an opportunity for that. But I'm also totally fine to go it alone.
So I reckon, and I would be very surprised if we didn't have overlaps and synergies. But I have a strong suspicion that when the day comes that we look at zone to win an enterprise portfolio deployment, and back to Eric's concept of the job of enterprise portfolios to deploy the next level of portfolio. Well, to figure out the next level of portfolio and then deploy it against a component of the enterprise strategy. Back when we were playing with the, shape, articulate, deploy model at the various levels. I reckon when we play with zone to win through that lens, we're going to have a very interesting take on EPM versus LPM. And we're not going to have that in anything like the time for the Berlin call for submissions. But it could be a very interesting collaboration for the US summit next year.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Real quick, if any of you know off the top here, when is the Berlin call due? Do we know?
November something.
10th of November,
sooner.
but I can look that up. I have it open here somewhere in the chaos of my tabs that I'm opening up here. So I think it was the 10th, but I will find it and
It's
I will
still
say it as
sooner
soon
than
as
I
we
would like. Anything starting in November is sooner than I would like. This conference isn't till April.
No, don't worry. Put it off till the last minute, Saahil. Like for the end, it's going to be very competitive to get spots in. So you just wait till the last minute. You'll be fine.
That's pretty much how I live my life with all deadlines. Isn't that how our clients do it too?
In theory. I mean, oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. In practice.
It's the last responsible moment, better known as the first irresponsible moment. It's easy. I'm a big fan of it.
The first irresponsible
That's great.
moment is one of my favorite concepts.
So
Yes.
I found it. It's the 10th of November. Yes,
The 10th.
the 10th.
It's a
Thank
good.
you.
It's a good thing it's on my calendar for later today to start actually writing up a submission and abstract.
It has been on my calendar for the last 5 days straight, and I have been hitting delay by 1 day every day for the last 5 days.
So your strategy is working. You put it on the calendar at least 2 weeks early, so you can do that for a week and then stress it.
I put it on.
Exactly.
It was nowhere near my calendar. I put it on the brain space at the start of this week to go, what might it be? And then I went, that's all right. I've got an idea now. I'll test it with the boys on Saturday. And if it passes that first sniff test, I'll go and write the abstract. I assume you'd like to start on the achieving agility frame, Eric? I've been seeing you drop things on.
Yeah, sure.
Did
sure.
you have I can start elsewhere.
Well, you're also not monitoring the streaming back channel. So I was asking you, what's the best way for me to sneak out and get coffee without disrupting the video? Because it's 6:30 in the morning now.
How about you just I'm ready to hit the transition button.
All right. So
Get
I will
your
be
coffee.
back in 2 minutes. All Oh, no, that means I stopped my video.
All right, done.
Goodbye, Eric.
Mission accomplished.
What are the odds he doesn't come back? Do you think that was his way of sneaking out, saying, "I'm not ready to talk about this yet,"
No, he's
and
very
we're
ready
just
to
gonna
talk
stay
about
here?
it.
I know, I know.
I've been watching him
But-
drop his images onto the Miro, going, he's prepared, and he's about to test hardcore thinking with us. So, on a side note, while he's off, I committed myself to developing a second new course this week. And then I queued
I
up the
love it.
one that comes after it. So
What is this? What is this course on?
it's an experiential product owner course.
Okay. So, as in, it's for experienced product owners, or it's a course that allows people to experience being a product owner?
It's a course, it's a product owner course, but focused on a lot more experiential involvement and, deep application of the techniques during the course. So more practice, less theory.
So, like an advanced product owner course.
Yeah. So kind of blending together basics of product owner with the product management concepts that apply to product ownership.
I love it.
Um,
How can we support you?
I will be needing testing. I
Absolutely.
have a rough topic list now, and I have to deliver it on the 15th of November. So the good news is I was very transparent with the client. We chatted, and he went, "This is the problem I need to solve." And I went, "This is how I'd like to solve it, because we could do this, we could do POPM, which doesn't quite meet your need. We could do APM, which also doesn't quite meet your need. Or I could follow through, because I've got a lot of energy for creating courses at the moment, and I could pick one off the queue." So, I want to, for example, there will be a deep dive into BDD, because I think that's an essential skill for a product owner. There will be a deep dive into story mapping, deep dive into the backlog refinement that should be occupying a large percentage of the product owner's life, as opposed to the 1 hour per week that it looks like if you look at the default slides. So it's going to be fun. And then I've also queued up the next course after that, which is going to be a cohort-based virtual facilitation course.
Okay. Virtual facilitation, in that you are teaching facilitation virtually, or a course around virtual facilitation?
Both.
Okay. All right. Teach by showing, or teach by doing. I love it.
Yeah, so the joy of a on-site course teaching how to do virtual facilitation is amusing, but ready for me, Mark?
I'm ready for you. In fact, I transitioned early, so we had a weird moment. I heard your voice and I automatically hit buttons. No,
Pavlonian.
I had a half-built facilitation course pre-COVID. I'd been building it module by module and sort of delivering them as standalone workshops with clients to iterate the modules. And then I'd scaffold it out, turning it into a full course. And I was just waiting for me to have the energy to fill in the modules I hadn't pre-built yet. And then COVID came and I went, well, that's on the back burner. And now you look and you go, well, actually, everybody needs to know how to do all of this stuff virtually, which raises the difficulty bar rather a bit. But I've been running a facilitation series with a group I'm coaching where we do an hour a week. We play with some new ideas. They go, they test them. The next week, I teach them some new facilitation techniques. But the things that we facilitate are discussions about what they've learned from applying the last week's ideas. And it's a lot of fun. And I went, okay, there we go. That's course plus one. On which note, Eric, I'm now vaguely paying attention to the streaming back channel, but it's still telling me you want a coffee. So where would you like me to start? Should I just, let me click on where you're focused. You're focused everywhere.
No, let's just talk for a minute. I have some visuals. They're from different decks over the years, but it's really about patterns of change that I've seen now. Wow, 10 years of 12 years of running transformations in various shapes. 14, arguably 2009, but you could draw some lines in different parts of the sand. The section that we've seen, and I think most of the literature and people writing is like right now between, do you drive change or do you create the conditions to allow change to emerge across the enterprise? Look at, and I'm drawing two fairly extreme poles there. The Big Bang top-down transformation at one wild extreme. We build a ways of working team and we help people get better when they want to at the other extreme. And I could take the same mindset and play it all the way back to 2007 or 8, maybe, when we were talking about what's the fundamental difference between Scrum and Kanban. They both theoretically iterate and evolve to the same place over time. A great Scrum team and a great Kanban team from the outside look pretty damn identical. But the things that go wrong in the path they take to get there are wildly different. And I draw this as, I'm using the Scrum and Kanban because it's less abstract than the full transformation view for the moment. Kanban will iterate your way from where you are to the perfect process for your environment, and it is a way to continuously find the perfect fit for purpose approach to doing the work you're trying to do. Scrum says, fundamentally, you must be broken if you're looking at this. So we're going to drop in a whole new set of practices that will give you the container to see what's wrong and fix it. And from there, you can start iterating and fixing things. Neither, by the way, was meant to be, here's the rules that you follow forever. Let's just put that on the record. And you, in the Japanese, you're thinking this is Kaizen versus Kaikaku. Like, do we do a big change and then improve from there? Do we do intentional iterative change the whole time? Well, take those questions and blow them up to the big, full company transformational change mindset. And I think you see the two extremes of people's approaches and philosophies that are showing up in case studies, showing up in literature, showing up in our own transformations. Do you go for big top down or do you go for iterative behavior? And whenever I see a beautiful binary choice like that, I start to look for what's the third path we're not talking about. And as we were starting the second pass through the book, so history of the book Gareth and I are writing is fundamentally we build a pretty complete outline, and then the day before we were supposed to start recording our series of drafts using with the writing coach we're working with. It was basically give a presentation on a chapter, and then they will generate a nice written draft for you to edit from. Interesting approach. I didn't particularly find it valuable, but basically the couple days before we started writing the first draft, we decided to change our persona. We changed who we were writing to, and that changed the tone and the content throughout, but we never quite caught it up. So now we're going back through the second pass and trying to really get tight on what is the message we're giving to the CIO persona that we're writing to. We were going more business owner and broader, and we decided to narrow it to technology leadership as part of writing this book. and that setting of what's this message we're trying to really put it in a nutshell for that leader, and this whole mindset of what's a better third way of shaping and thinking about change, um, got us thinking deeply about using essentially new products as your vehicle for organizational change for the other dimensions you're trying to fix. So we know that modern business, new product introduction is accelerating dramatically. You need, Mick, I think, quoted McKinsey in saying like 7 a year for companies as of this year is the tread water level for a reasonably sized enterprise. That's giving us a consistent dose of change to come along with. And pulling back balanced scorecard ideas, and like we've already changed the idea of a balanced scorecard in the last decade from being you should think about more than just revenue to here's the pirate metrics, a broad range of different ways of looking at product success. Like that's a whole balanced scorecard. And then other companies layer in employee outcomes and organizational health type stuff. What if we start also layering in technology refresh as a part of the scorecard? What if we start to layer in organizational capabilities and skills development of your teams and trains or people as part of the scorecard? And then use these new product introductions, which are themselves experiments, layer in additional success metrics that are first order citizens, and start iteratively improving the organization, basically continuing to grow a new, better outer shell, and then clean up the legacy bits as you go. So it's kind of flipping it to a different dimension of looking at change, holistic in small pieces rapidly.
At the risk of being risque, it feels like you've just described the strangler pattern of transformation.
Explicitly, yes. It's strangler idea applied to transformation because Conway's transfers everything, including behavioral patterns.
Yeah.
And maybe I should do more research and see what people have written in explicitly on that. But we're tying this to new product introduction and placing those bigger asymmetric bets, Jeffrey Moore-esque. Like how do you get to stream those?
On a side note, I've added to the streaming backlog the why you switch from business owner to CIO, but I figure that's going to be a whole nother thread. So it's in the backlog, just so you know.
Actually, it's a pretty brief one. We've both worked with both, but we clearly and definitively have more experience with the CIO audience, and we decided to write for the people we know, rather than putting ourselves at risk of writing beyond our skis.
Cool.
That was a pretty straightforward one. It's like, our credibility is very strong here. Later, I might want to have this credibility out here. I'm not going to claim it yet.
Very short one.
That is the storyline and the thinking process. And I pulled up the graphics because they made me think, but I don't think I actually need to show them.
Oh, I just turned them on.
So there's my construct. You guys can pull up the graphics if you want to ask questions about them. But that's where we're thinking, and I kind of just gave a very not concise overview of chapter 1. So
if we loop back, and maybe I'll just do it structurally, right? So new product value streams is a transformational tool. Maybe if that's a kind of focusing mechanism in that, because it feels like what you just described was a much broader piece of the puzzle, and this is one of the tools in that. Pretty critical tool, but
the bigger flow of the book is using rapid asymmetric bets to improve your enterprise, creating extent flow both within and across those as a source of mastery, and then almost zooming in streetlight style into a handful of the critical moves when you're creating and scaling new value streams. things tend to go wrong. Like, what do you need to think about while you're making the initial investment decision? What kind of disruptions do you need to anticipate as you're shopping and selling this? What are the skills necessary to mobilize your team and then scale it with success? Because those are different than our normal launching art patterns and so on. So you're right. It is a zoom in. It is an interesting interlude that I could accidentally write a whole book around. So the summit topic, since I realized that's where we're actually at, not into the next topic yet, that they blurred with me, would probably be a pretty tight coverage of here are the habits we have for thinking about large scale change, maybe draw it back from the Scrum Kanban initial same destination, different journeys. And then bring that forward to transformation, and then talk about Strangler IB transformation. Thank you for the direct metaphor now, as a useful pattern to augment your toolkit and allow you to be relevant as a transformation team place when working with large new initiatives, new product launches. And it's almost, I could argue, it's almost going back to safe program management if you wanted to get too picky on it, but with a product lens around it. And I pulled up the Venn diagram from the framework because like new large launches provide everyone else. Like that's where you're always going to have a constant source of the 4 factors.
Testing a couple of pieces of this puzzle.
Yeah, it does.
When you're thinking about this, are you thinking about a Horizon 2 type new product, or are you thinking about any new product and it could just be a Horizon 1, or are you thinking about actually it could be a product that traverses the entire Horizon 3 to 1 journey?
It's probably attaching them to the Horizon 2 transition predominantly. I find most, well, I guess we have to talk about, are we talking zone to win more? Or are we talking about earlier more? Because he changes the definition and usage of Horizon 2 as he talks about taking the field for offense or defense.
And that's probably part of the question that I'm asking, because if you play the zone to win version of Horizon 2, then he basically says the company can have only one thing in Horizon 2. It has to report directly to the CEO. As soon as you've got something in Horizon 2, you've got to kill everything in Horizon 3, either via divest or attaching itself to something that's in Horizon 1. You know, it's an all singing, all dancing beast. Where if you think about the escape velocity version of Horizon 2, it was not nearly so exclusive as that. But it did.
I
I was just going to say, what I thought he did really powerfully in escape velocity with it was go, you know, there's a reality that says this thing is going to compete hard with Horizon 1 for access to your supply chain, your sales machine, your marketing machine. And it's going to be at a horrendous disadvantage because of the fact that it's not a cash cow. But if you think through that kind of whole product lens, if you don't have the guaranteed access to those capabilities, you're not going to get that whole product through the transition. But it also does a really nice thing about the kind of change in leadership model and what happens as you start to move from Horizon 2 to the preparation to transition to Horizon 1. And if I think through the escape velocity model, I go, that's a really useful thing in terms of framing the evolution journey and the various things you're going to have to do along the way, but also how you set up something quite significant for success and for creating new patterns. Where the zone to win model is it's such a massive bet that you're only going to have one of them at a time, and it's going to be huge.
I'm trying to see if I can grab I can't find where in the book he actually introduces the playing offense, playing defense element. And what I realized when you were saying that is the Oldmore, his original work, is when you're in halftime, when you're not on the field as the CEO.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to talk about offense and defense, and that's where the flush horizon 3, focus on one horizon 2, place your big bet and go, battle mode play comes in. So I took him, because I was treating them as like old model, new model. I'm like, no, he's actually taking a model and saying, okay, now here's 2 special modes that you go into that change how the old model applies, as opposed to replacing it.
I'm looking at
But
it back.
anyway, back to your original question. I'm really talking about Horizon 2 level efforts, or at least an internal Horizon 2 as part of a large business unit. It doesn't have to be a whole company one. So Zone to Win has the fractal replication within the zones.
Yep.
And what I'm not recommending this for is incremental products. Like, yes, we have 47 different insurance products that serve this market, and we're adding number 48 that tweaks these 5 things. That's configuration.
Yep.
That's a single product family doing iterative improvement. We're talking about non-incremental, bigger bets, things that are going to be potentially asymmetric. To answer your original question, I like the questions because I'm running out. I could just talk and it's going to get random and weird. Ask questions.
I feel like I've been hogging the questions. Wolfgang, Saahil.
Saahil, do you want to go first?
I don't know that I have any immediate questions. I've just been processing the conversation, and I appreciate the discussion. I think that this is something that I just need a little bit more time to think about before I can say anything intelligent. See, this is my problem, right? Because I'm having so many thoughts, I don't know which one's the important one or how to make them come out in a way that makes sense. Uh, I will say the thing that resonated the most for me so far is changing your audience. I realize that that's probably going back 10 minutes in the conversation, but that was the one moment where I was like, oh, yeah, that's really smart. Not that the rest wasn't also really smart, but I don't think it would have occurred to me to lift up to that level.
Yeah, it was a explicit discussion that I had with multiple people in my Square Squad, and then with Gareth as a co-author. It's like, yeah, we don't want to be one of those books that's writing for the next audience. We want to write one of the books that's summarizing the work we've actually done. And yes, there's new realizations and learning we've extracted from our experience and so on. It's not just like writing a case study, but it's not writing about what we want to do and learn next. And I think there's enough books out there that are clearly written in that way as a future positioning element. It's like that's not what we want. We've done this. We've practiced this a dozen times each in different environments at different scales. Let's write that story and get it written so that people can learn from it.
I love that.
So I have a provocative question. When I look at the headline, new product value streams as a transformation tool, and then I'm thinking back to this original paper, the new product development game, which actually was a part of the basis for the Scrum framework. Now, in that paper, the authors are talking about essentially self-organized teams, what we would probably call Scrum teams now, but it wasn't like Scrum as a framework wasn't invented back then when the paper was written in the 1980s. So essentially what they wrote in the paper is that larger companies set up Scrum teams, and these Scrum teams were out to explore new technologies or new things that the company could like potentially market in when they had like a certain boundary conditions fulfilled, like a new copy machine, which is actually cheaper than the copy machines up to now and has the same quality or something like that. Now, this back then in the Nunu product development game in that paper was already like a transformational tool, like a new product value stream, so to speak, and a transformational tool for the company, even though we hadn't had any agile movement at that point in time. Now, what you have explained, Eric, and like this is just like a provocative question, is to a degree essentially something like the Nunu product development game, just a level higher. Like you're not looking at Scrum teams who are doing that, but at entire agile release trains, or is it something completely different that you had in mind, and I was just on the wrong track?
Um, the way you ask the question implies a static scale. Whereas if you're launching and growing a value stream, it is growth. It might start with 3 people. We're out there figuring out if this is feasible. I've got a good architect who knows my systems. I've got somebody who knows the market, and I've got that wild harebrained executive who had the crazy idea in the first place. And they huddle in a room for 4 hours a couple times a week until they have enough to pitch it for real. And then you've got your single Scrum team scale that grows into it and builds that sufficient prototype / proof of concept / whatever it ends up being for the nature of the product that lets you generate belief across the company, and through generating belief, generate money for funding, and get it to a place where you could actually test it with customers. Or maybe you take it and you go test it with customers and you bring, hey, we just sold this to our top 10 customers. We should probably go build it. I mean, I've seen it work both ways in the enterprise. Depending on which way you take, different people complain. But it could be an art. It could grow through an art. It could grow through a solution train. It could be in some entire own portfolio if it's a truly asymmetric bet after a couple of years of growth. It's not about scale. It's about the mindset and orientation you take to building the cross-functional organization that basically provides the container for flow. And that flow is of learning and new product capabilities that allow you to emerge successful in the market or detect quickly that you failed and stop investing money, which is its own success.
But if I got you right, like what you are talking about is essentially building on this original paper by Takeuchi Nonaka, the Nunu product development game. So it's like you take this idea and you get like a couple of steps further with the idea, saying, hey, it's maybe not a static thing that we are doing here, not building up a team and then we have a proof of concept that we can market that, but when we want to bring something to Horizon 1, essentially, then this is also a tool, like creating a value stream, growing that value stream, developing that value stream is also a tool for restructuring the company on the run.
The last part of what you said, absolutely. I mean, if you go back to new product development game, it is explicitly Scrum, by the way. Quote, under the rugby approach, the product development process emerges from the constant interaction of a handpicked multidisciplinary team whose members work together from start to finish. And it is not the source of Scrum. It actually is Scrum, and they talk about rugby and Scrum throughout, and the Scrum, as opposed to the process we call Scrum now. So from that point of view, yes, it's absolutely compatible with that. Deming talks about similar things. Lean talks about similar things. I don't want to give the idea of a cross-disciplinary value stream to any one body of knowledge because it can person a whole bunch all at once. But the idea that you're using that to not just launch the product, but also to explicitly achieve certain organization improvement goals along the way. That's the different part that I want to focus on.
So I feel like that triggered something for me now, right? Because when you start to think about, well, Wolfgang said restructuring the organization, you say, focusing on something different. So are you envisioning using these new product value streams as, well, because if I come back to SAFe principle 10, it's organize around value, right? And frequently we use that to mean organize around a value stream. So if
Mhm.
we identify this new product value stream and say, all right, well, how do we organize around this? That might require pulling people from other parts of the organization. It might require adding new capabilities and skill sets through hiring or outsourcing vendors or bringing in
Mhm.
new people. There is an element of disruption to the old value streams that will happen by doing this, right?
Correct.
And it could be that the old value streams are running well, or they're not optimized well. You may not even know that you're organized around value streams, but you are. They might just be bad value streams in the past. So as you optimize the new value stream, how do you envision minimizing the disruption to the stuff that is downsizing? Because something has to downsize.
Wrong first question.
Wrong. Okay.
The very important first question is, how much do we prioritize minimizing the disruption to the existing structure? And that's a strategic decision. If we are zoned to win taking the field for offense or defense, I don't care. I want to make sure I don't cripple them, but I'm okay disrupting them as a senior leader.
Yeah.
If I'm
Yes. Okay.
if I'm not in that mode, then I might take a more careful touch with how much
So
damage I do in the process of saving the company.
fair enough.
So
And
don't I
and
really
the
I don't
reminder
assume,
that, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
yeah, I just don't assume that minimizing the disruption is a primary goal. It might be, it might not be.
Fair enough. And from the perspective of that senior leader, that makes a lot of sense. So let me reframe my question. If I'm the senior leader that's decided I don't care that I'm disrupting the old value stream, how would you coach me to communicate that to the old value stream?
That is a great
Because
question.
I, because if I'm now the value stream lead, the business owner or the RTEs and product managers inside that value stream, my entire plan just got disrupted.
I,
Um, I actually have that's an easy conversation from the coach's perspective. It's a much harder one from the leader's perspective. But it's one I'm quite familiar with. Um, the short version is it will depend because I explicitly will bring this back to the overwhelming ethos of the company as part of the
Mm.
messaging and the core values that the company faces, like what's their purpose in existing. Um, but because that influences everything about how you authentically share that as a leader. You have to live those values and align with it as you communicate this big change or this new inspirational
So you
goal.
need that enterprise vision, enterprise strategy well defined to be able to have that conversation, right? That
You need
the
you need that enterprise purpose, the thing that makes people want to work at the company in the first place. The strategy, you need to be betting on it enough that you can talk about it confidently and not change your plans 2 weeks later.
uh,
It's
yeah, I
been
would
well
imagine
defined.
that disrupting this old value stream, downsizing it, whatever, is going to be a part of the enterprise strategy, right? I should be able to point to, we have a plan,
Mhm.
and this is the right thing for the enterprise because of our purpose and because of our strategy, and we have a plan to take care of you so that you're not just adrift as well. But I mean, those sound like now they're enablers or prerequisites to being able to have this conversation. right? I've been in organizations that couldn't articulate their purpose. Forget their enterprise strategy; they couldn't articulate their purpose.
Yeah, and this is where you're using strategy and plan language, and I'm trying to use people language. And they both apply here. You got to have the foundational understanding of where you're going, why, and whether you can afford it, whether you can afford not to, and so on. But when you talk about, to your question, as a leader, how do I communicate this to the company, especially the people that are going to be disrupted more so? That's a people conversation, not a plan conversation. And that's where I'm going back to, I got to connect this to the purpose. I need everybody to see their role in this change. I mean, it's kind of like, it feels like it's an overused one, but the janitor with Eisenhower and the moonshot. And it's like, I'm not sweeping the floors, I'm sending a man to the moon. Like, you've got to connect everybody's role towards that goal and resist that desire. And that it's so common. I see it, and every executive has a moment of wanting to do this, of making it okay for everybody else to keep doing what they're doing. And it's not okay. Like, you are going to be disrupted. You can't hand wave it away and say, no, you're going to be fine. Here's all the happy talk for you, while we actually put all our focus and energy over here. That's what kills a culture. That's what starts to create the toxic behaviors. But when you lean in by name, it's like, hey, we're making a huge bet. And you guys, you have a critical role to play in creating the stability despite what we're about to do to you that allows us to take the company to the next level. And that foundational, that cash cow value stream is a critical part of the strategy of taking the company to the next level. Can't do it without it. But also, if you don't change, if you don't break free and dealing with Darwin, breaking free of the momentum of past innovations, you're stuck there. And I see a fear of naming that in leadership in many companies. The ones that people follow and get excited by are the leaders that are willing to name it and do the hard things anyway.
I was just going to agree that all of that made sense to me. And I think there's, it's not just people language or plan language. It's having the transparency and the authenticity that come from being a good leader. And it requires both, right? I would almost envision it as the plan language is the data behind your data-driven decisions.
Mhm.
And then the way you communicate that and the way you approach it is through the people side, right? Because like I said earlier, my experience, I'm starting to realize sustaining transformation is all about people. It's all about people language. It's all about people's perception of what's happening.
Yeah. So I want to pick on one thing because it was an interesting turn of phrase. The authenticity that comes from being a good leader. I would actually flip that. The authenticity that leads to being a good leader.
Yeah, if I said authenticity that comes from being a good leader, I didn't mean that was a slip of the tongue. I didn't mean it that way. I agree with you. I think the authenticity that is exemplified by being a good leader is what I was trying to say.
Yeah, but before Mark jumps in because he had his mouth open and paused, I want to build on what we just said though. When you've got people that align to that vision, and you've got people excited by what can happen, in that new area, you've opened the change box. People are much more tolerant to anything new that they need to do to succeed inside that space that's driving hard and trying to achieve a goal. And that to me is the fertile ground for transformation. That's where you start to have people that don't ask the million hard possible questions with the idea of killing the new technology you want to bring in. That's where people don't share all the million reasons not to try a new process, try a new thing. Because once you're focused on getting to that new goal and creating that new outcome, new product that you're launching, you're willing to try a lot more new things to make that happen. And that, I think, is one of the biggest drivers. I look at the Venn diagram for picking the right heart to start. Like, we just created an environment where we've got people already collaborating, a huge compelling goal, clear product solution and mission, and obvious leadership support. We're putting a bunch of money behind it. Of course, we're going to try the new stuff to be successful in making that happen. And we should pour more support behind making that new stuff test and learn rapidly in service of launching that product, and then be prepared to extract it and educate and share it elsewhere once it's tested and proven in the company. And very large successful transformation 7 years on, I can point back to one program that was leading edge and frankly tried it was 500 people, so SAFe was the right scale solution. Tried it and didn't even bat an eye. The entire decision process from this might be an okay thing to we're planning our value stream launch with a couple hundred people next week was a week long. Like that was the cycle of selling SAFe back then, because it was such a clear solution to the problem at hand. And it then had ripples for years of positive impact and stories people told, good and bad, because it was fast, and that's the learning cycle. And I know of at least 3 or 4 presentations that company has done at SAFe Summits in similar environments this many years on. So that's the essence of this mindset, is in those times of intense product launch, that's the most fertile ground to try new things, learn from them, and improve them in the company to overcome the objections that happen if you're trying to install SAFe on top of a group that's perfectly happy the way it is.
So Mark wanted to say something. So I had 2 thoughts that I wanted to to share, but Mark was first to share something, I think.
I've got a big question that I'm going to sit on, but just on that particular thread, I think you can't underestimate the fact that you've based this on a significant new product. But the energy is not a new way of working. The energy is a significant new product.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The new way of
It's a
working.
concrete thing to get excited about.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
It's a
So it's visible. There will be a marketing machine already mobilized, painting beautiful videos to get people excited about, because it's a new product, right? The organization, if we're talking the kind of scale of new product that we're thinking about in H2, even if it's not a full on zone to win H2, that's going to be visible in every area of the company as an exciting thing of the future.
Mm-hmm.
So your message is, we're creating this exciting thing of the future, right? And let's take an easy example. Every telco on the planet has been through launching 5G over the last few years, right? Huge disruption. But you're getting behind, hey, we're going to be first to market with the best 5G solution in the country. And we want to be first and best. And we're going to, as part of that, change some things about the way we approach rolling out a significant new product. So you're writing that. But I think the other thing is to say, when it comes to that disruption to those not involved in it, I don't think personally that I would be using a minimize word. I'd be using a manage word.
Mm-hmm.
There will be disruption. Yep. And we're going to have to manage it. And you can't ignore it or pretend it's not going to be there. But you're going to be in a parallel period for a time. So I think the choice of language is really important.
Yeah, it's not minimize. It is let people understand why. And the disruption will feel small at first. I mean, if you're growing a value stream instead of trying to rip everybody out and create a huge one from scratch, it's a little bit more of a boil the frog situation, because it's like, oh yeah, we're losing a couple of people every few months from each of our products because they're going off to do this really cool new thing, and we're celebrating them. So no wonder they're taking some of our better people. But also, if you're in those teams, you see why. And if your leaders aren't talking about it as like a defensive thing to protect our product, they're talking about it as, this is our opportunity to help this other product make something big, that changes the whole tone. But it does require significant acts of leadership and courage to name things the way they are to navigate this.
So now I have 3 things to throw into the discussion. So
Any more than that?
and we are almost running out of time, but this may be like topics for discussions later on. And I'm just sketching the three topics that came to my mind while you were discussing that. So the one thing is, for years, like I don't know for how many years, but it was surely before the start of the pandemic, so probably for 5 or 6 years, I'm running around when I'm working with LACE teams, and I'm saying, so the single most important thing that a LACE team has to do is to connect the organizational change to a business outcome, saying like in technical architecture, usually the question is, what are we able to do if we change the organizational architecture, and if we are investing a certain amount of capacity, money, or whatever into the change of the organizational architecture, in the technical architecture. And the same should be clear for the organizational architecture, saying, okay, this is a goal that we want to achieve. And we will not be able to achieve that with the organizational architecture, with the communication and collaboration structure that we have right now. So if we are changing the communication and collaboration architecture in our company, then we will probably be able to do that, or we will able to do that in a much better way. And there is, at least from my point of view, nothing that is as important or as powerful as this connection between organizational change and a clear business outcome. Whenever I had that, and I was lucky enough to have that in a couple of transformations, when there was a clear coupling between we are changing the way we're working together because we want to achieve this business goal, the transformation was like a lot more smoother, because the people knew why they were doing that, and were like flocking behind this idea. So this is the one thing. The other thing that came to my mind when I was listening to the conversation was, for many years I was running around telling the people, if you want to have a good software development process, then the most important thing that you have to care for is how you get your software out of the field, not into the field, because this is a given. You have somehow to get your software into the field. But a good software development process always has a clear understanding of how to get software out of the field. Now, if I have this in mind, then I'm close to this vision that that is presented in team topology, saying creating software is actually a conversation between the user and the software developer, because then you can really react to what the user needs. Now, this means that this disruption of like bringing in a new product into the market is maybe just a spectrum. Of course, if you have a hardware product and you bring that hardware product to the market, then of course, like a new car or something, probably another car model has to die down so that you have the capacity to bring a new one in. But essentially, it's not a black and white most of the time. It's more like a spectrum where you say, okay, I can incorporate the change into the value streams that we already have, and over time progress or develop that to a new product that we want to offer. So of course it's easier in software than in hardware, but even in hardware, I think there is a certain spectrum that we are opening up with say for Agile for hardware, where you are more in this like where you're not only stuck with, okay, I have to get something out of the market, but I can evolve things to a degree. And the third thing that came to my mind was saying, okay, but is that saying I have a train, and within the train, I have not only the capacity, for instance, to produce software, but I also have the capacity to, for instance, A/B testing and things like that. So I have a train with market research on the train, and taking things out of the field, bringing new things into the field. Where we are then not like restricted to this is the product that we are delivering, but actually the train itself, or whatever, like the solution train or whatever it is, the train itself has the capacity to restructure itself while it's running. So, and these were 3 questions that I actually had in mind to say, okay, now, is it also from your point of view the most important thing to connect business outcome to the organizational change? Is this while you're driving that?
I mean, that's been a given for as long as transformation's been transforming, I think. So yes, the short answer of that one is yes. Almost, I don't mean this in a negative way, but yes, obviously. You don't change unless you have a reason for change, and if you're like agile for agile's sake is one of the biggest anti-patterns out there.
But from my point of view, at least from what I'm seeing out there in the field, a lot of the transformations, and I will probably say the majority of the transformation that are out there, they don't have this connect. And there is actually not a lot of literature that I can refer them to where it's like explicitly stated how you're doing that. It's more like a given for if you're a coach and you have a certain kind of experience, then this is something that comes naturally. But it's not anywhere, at least not where I know of, in any framework. It's like even when I look at the SAFe framework or the Scrum framework or any other framework, there is no statement about that, and there is no clear guidance of how to connect the two.
I will disagree.
Okay, great.
Tell
Yeah, me.
I mean, it's explicitly there in the core about, at least in the principles. I mean, I think maybe even implied in core values. Like we talk about the value. I mean, what you're saying is any place we talk about aligning the value, organized around value, what you're saying is value. Change is connected to value. Like you can't escape it. It's an economic view. Principle number 1.
Absolutely, I'm with you. For me, it's just like almost every time that I spoke about that in any transformation, it was new to the people. It was not, even though for me, it's the most powerful tool that we have in any transformation. It's not something that is on the front page. It's not something that occurs naturally to the people. It's not something that the people get a lot of guidance on. I love the picture that Mark has on the mirror board.
Eric found it, and it made me smile.
I actually bought that one. I bought the rights to that so I could reuse it in any deck indefinitely.
Look, to be honest, is there literature out there saying you've got to link your purpose to your outcome? You know, endless quotes, references, content. Do people pay attention to it enough? That's probably a different question. But in the spirit of not going on a really long sidetrack, because boy, that'd be a long sidetrack. I'm going to be with Eric's first answer. Yes, obviously, it's important. We've been saying it for years. Not enough people take it seriously.
But that would be like a good discussion for one of the next Saturdays. I would really be highly interested in, because probably there is something behind that. So why are people not really interested in that? Or why are there such a lot of transformations where it's completely new to them to link the organizational change to a certain business outcome, and how to do that? So like guidance, a book about that, I don't have anything to recommend, to be honest.
There's plenty of whys. You just look for all the transformations that have been disasters.
I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. That's a pretty decent summary. To bring it back to the original conversation, the essence of this is making that linkage not only explicit, but shrinking the change. We'll pull some Cotter in for a moment, or switch. So shrink the change and align it to that business goal inherently, and then align your scoring so that it is valued and not a side effect. And be intentional, like design which pieces of new technology are we explicitly creating and retiring as part of the journey? Design which new skills and capabilities do we want to see organizationally as part of this change? And when I say design, I don't mean like upfront big. I mean, be explicit and say, hey, we're doing this change. We know we're going to need a new experience platform out of this. Let's use this as a chance to refresh our tech stack and create an anchor for the rest of the company to follow. And we know we need to get better at high-speed procurement with boutiques. So let's ask for that to be an explicit outcome of this as well. Like, that's the degree of design I'm talking about, is like, let's put some objectives out there in our OKRs that aren't just product objectives.
Yeah.
And pull through change as a result. And once it's proven, it can be used elsewhere.
So this is where I'm going to actually, just before, because I'm about to open potentially a big topic. Did you feel like you have satisfaction from the responses to your speeches, Wolfgang?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I know that this is, it would probably be a good idea to continue that, what we had today, next Saturday, because it's such a huge topic and it's such a critical topic, I think, for every transformation. And also like what I said in point 2 and 3, like opening up the spectrum, saying, hey, do we really have to launch new products, or how much of a capability can we bake into so that the value streams are able to transform themselves while they are running into new things. So there is like, from my point of view, there is a lot in that conversation which I have never seen in a book, or which I have never seen in any training material or anything, which I think is highly relevant for especially larger transformations when you have several thousands of people in whatever kind of agile construction. So I think I would really like to continue that.
So it sounds like you'll see some of it in Eric's book at least. And I will say, when you started speech number 2, my fingers started moving towards the sound effect board. But you dodged the buzzwords.
Demonstrated some real growth.
But
you didn't say solution train or fracture plane.
Yeah,
Once
and I
in
didn't say
either of them.
solution area deliberately.
We're gonna get Wolfgang to practice the synonyms.
All right. I'm going to go to, and I think for me, the critical piece of escape velocity was the discussion about the transition across H2 to H1.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the fascinating, and it's probably too big to open properly at 22. But that concept, this is fantastic. I've got a new, big, well-recognized product. Lots of momentum behind, creating attraction into this new thing as a vehicle of change, as well as of an amazing new product, right? Given.
Yeah.
The question, and my memory is, it was literally the back half of escape velocity, was what happens when you go across those boundaries. And I dug a couple of quotes up from my escape velocity notes and dropped them on the mirror. I might just zoom into them now. Just to use, and by the way, the zone defense, zone offense reference you're looking for before, Eric, in escape velocity, you call them differentiation, neutralization, and productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Where arguably differentiation's offense and neutralization's defense. But the quote that
I was just looking for his definition in the beginning of Zone to Win, and that's like, he was already referencing them in chapter 1, and I didn't feel like going back and trying to read through the intro while we were talking.
the quote that I dug for was this notion of invention, deployment, and optimization. And it basically said this thing's going to go through these three modes. Invention is arguably dominantly Horizon 3. Horizon 2 is going to be a blend of invention and deployment. And then the balance late in Horizon 2 shifts more towards deployment than invention. And then as soon as you're in Horizon 1, it's optimization. Now, whether it's performance or productivity in optimization is going to depend on which part of Horizon 1 you're in. But that whole, what happens when it crosses that boundary? Because if I thought about sort of various places I've seen, let's talk about someone I saw do it well. I saw one company a long time ago now, it would have been back in 2014, 2015. They ran incubators, right? And it was a company that was by and large doing safe, but they were out testing and incubating ideas. And they're in partnerships with a number of, universities and research organizations, and they were just testing ideas and moving fast. And when they did that, they went, arts are not the right vehicle for that because we're in way too exploratory a mode. They had small teams that are doing very rapid testing and evolution. But the notion was anything that proved out and found product market fit, eventually they would then scale it and absorb more people across. And where these things did find the product market fit, did find the absorption, they became sustainable, really nice, long-running engines.
Yep.
And quite often, as an example, technology-wise at this point in time, it was when serverless was pretty new from a cloud perspective. And the main CI/CD pipelines and cloud configurations in the main organization were changing very, very slowly. And just to think about introducing serverless to their standard cloud configs was probably a year in the queue. These guys, because they're in innovation land, got permission to play. They were in less risky territory in terms of the financial aspect of life. And they went and they proved out patterns for serverless that then made their way back into the mainstream. It was a really good example of that, creation of space, freedom to innovate on new ideas and then absorb it back in. And these things became long running. So there's an example of seeing it work really well. Then I'm going to go to some examples where it perhaps caused a lot more challenge. And there's been a trend lately in Australia, and I'm sure we're not alone, that big companies spin off, let's say, excessively well-funded incubators to free themselves from a variety of the shackles of the big company for, major new product concept. So, for example, I'll take three well-known examples over here. We had Telstra, our dominant telco, wanted to play with a lower cost, no bricks and mortar version of itself because they wanted access to a more budget conscious market, and they didn't feel like they could do that without violating their brand promise in terms of service and the like under themselves. So they spun up a sub entity called Belong and went, go forth, have freedom. And in that spun off sub entity, Belong had a lot of freedom to play with different ways of working, with different ways of leveraging technology. They actually built a phenomenal technology crew over there, and they were able to really evolve very rapidly. Woolworths, I think they're now a dominant supermarket chain, spun off a thing they called Woolies X. They wanted to reimagine supermarkets. And that was actually their vehicle for quite significant change in their way of working there as well. as well as technology, right? And there was a huge technology integration aspect to all these X. ANZ, one of our big four banks, spun off ANZX. Imagine the digital bank of the future. And in spinning them up, they partitioned them. They gave them all kinds of very different rules about the type of people they could hire, the ways they might interact with technology. All kinds of new things were incubated in each of these spin-offs. But each one of the spin-offs eventually gets reabsorbed. And there's a really interesting culture shock, because when it's a spin-off, you get a bunch of people who quite often would never have worked for the mothership
Mhm.
now being absorbed back into the
Like an
mothership.
acquisition. It's almost as big as an acquisition when you're talking about those big company, enterprise level spinoffs.
Yeah. But it's also like an acquisition of a, let's say a big consultancy, a big traditional consultancy buys an agile consultancy.
No experience with that.
Carefully picking, avoiding names, right? And I think there was a lot of goodness in escape velocity about preparing for and being very deliberate around that.
Mhm.
And then if I gave one more example, and this wasn't a spin-off example, it was a really interesting one. It was a company I actually spent a week with on my research trips back in 2019. And they had a large legacy estate. They couldn't figure out how to break themselves out because they were so trapped in, managing the demand in their legacy. But they had a particular product and they went, we're at a point where we really need to reimagine this product because we're lagging with our competitors. It's not a we can enhance it and keep alive anything anymore. It's we need to relaunch this new product. And to do that, that was actually where they used as their safe pilot. They set it up and they changed almost every rule. The biggest rule they changed was they had traditional rate caps on how much they could pay engineers. And they said to build this new thing, we're going to have to hire world-class, smart engineers, well-versed in new technologies. So we're going to negotiate rate exemptions so that we can have a smaller crew of more proficient engineers to build it. They brought in domain-driven design, domain-driven architecture. It was all very anchored in this is the business problem we're solving. And success is these things are different in our business performance. But in pursuit of that, they didn't just change their way of working, they changed their way of hiring, their way of engineering, their way of architecting, and they got phenomenal stuff. But I was talking to the CIO, and the CIO said SAFe doesn't scale. Because after that was such a radical success, we expanded and we've gone from 1 train to 5 trains. And we couldn't hold it up. But going from 1 train to 5 trains, they didn't maintain a whole bunch of the things they'd done in that first train to make it possible.
Yep.
I almost just hearing that, like intrinsically hearing we made it successful with 1 train and then we expanded to 5 and it failed, so SAFe doesn't scale. Like it boggles my mind that there wasn't even a consideration of did we get this wrong? Right? The user error is always a possibility, right? I'm not trying to say that people are bad at implementing SAFe and we can always make it easier on people to do that, but to immediately go to SAFe doesn't scale seems like a CYA maneuver. Do you guys say that in Australia or Germany?
Yeah, we'd maybe say it a little bit more bluntly than that. But but not
Yeah.
on live streams. I'm going to tell you now, this guy was a really smart guy and his team were really smart people. They really were. There was nothing in it to me that felt like it was a CYA.
Okay.
But there's
Go.
I just I think I'm with you, Mark, because what I hear in that is they grew their instance of SAFe that was fit for purpose. And then they changed the context and did not regrow SAFe to fit the new purpose.
Yeah.
And that to me is the biggest risk of mechanical agility and SAFe is you try to keep replicating without reconsidering. And SAFe, frankly, doesn't give you the right set of tools and instructions to go do that reliably. That's an exercise left to the reader and the implementer, but it's a natural part of change management and transformation leadership, is to constantly refit so that you're constantly fit for purpose.
But I think it's also, if you keep running down that path, this moment of when you've created these vehicles, one of the things that differentiated this area was a very different style of engineer to their existing engineering workforce. Right, so they got amazing outcomes from a different style of engineer. But if I was thinking about, and arguably to me, the scaling for them was actually a transition.
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing to either grow your existing engineers in preparation for the transition, or shift your workforce mix, or embed and blend in some of the different caliber engineers into the new parts of your work? Like, if you recognize the various things, and what they did so smartly with their first one was you just looked across literally every dimension to pay attention to make it work. And it was people, it was capability, it was way of working, it was technology, all in beautiful harmony. But then they hadn't prepared the rest of the organization to take that harmonistic set of steps. They only took the way of working across.
So there's a piece of it, and I want to say this might be in Tornado. I forget which more book it was, but there's a place where he talks about the intentional easing out of the innovators and recycling them to the next effort, and the easing in of the operators.
It's in Escape Velocity.
Is it later in the book? Okay, I only read the first half. And that mindset is key to me. It's like, it sounds like a binary transition to the next 5. That's the prepare. It's not, because I don't think about it. I don't like to prepare language and then inflict or to change the people, but it's the not go from pre-acquisition to post-acquisition, or go from state A to state B as a stepwise function. It's finding habits to feather the two together. And that becomes a key part of the change management, is you look at people who have no exposure to it, intermingle and work on the same efforts with the people who have deep exposure, and that's where the learning occurs. And then by the time you've let all of the original people move on to do things, the habits sustain. You've got a group that knows it and understands it and can apply it successfully. And I think when we see companies do the rubber stamp adoption approach, where it's like, okay, we got one, now let's repeat it. We don't do that intermingling. We don't do that sharing forward. We start the journey over with new people, but we expect them to somehow do it without going through the journey.
So
yes, I remember this as a Ryan Martin slide at Rally, not as reading the book. So I think he had a whole visual and innovation framework around this.
Because he basically says you need a transition team. This is what needs to be in the transition team. And I caught those 2 quotes because they were absolutely glorious. If I had to pick one, it would be the bottom one, right? So members of the transition team have to be empowered to commit their functions to the new way of going. No non-rowing observers on the boat. Otherwise, it degenerates into an endless series of meetings with no actionable outcomes other than to schedule the next meeting. I thought that was just beautiful.
And this is the 2-to-1 transition section.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, these are in the world where he talks about a complete change up of leadership, but then a transition team to support that. And he goes into quite a bit of detail about the necessary functions that should be present on that transition team. And it's all the functions that have to transition to the new style. But
I think in the rally leadership team, he procured his services for an hour or two at one point. And I got the joy of listening to the recording of him evaluating our environment and talking about it. And it was powerful. Like there's some really good stuff in that I'm unfortunately can't share the details even this many years later. One thing that struck me remembering that is that it wasn't a hard transition the way it comes across in the book. It wasn't meant to be a handoff. It wasn't meant to be an interleaving over time activity, or at least the way he described it in practice.
that was what I read in the book.
Okay.
Like there was
Well,
a
it's like
moment. There was a moment
think
where
of it
it's.
as a-
There was a moment where it was a handoff of leadership, but I don't know. Here's the other good quote for it. That was his kind of framing of the transition, right? A program to drive the organisation to a tipping point so that what began under one set of managers is now fully taken up by another.
Yeah, that I like that better. Thank you.
Yeah. I've just cost you the second half of the book again now, haven't I?
I don't need to write that till chapter 9.
On which note, it's 2:00. So
It's 8 a.m. We can keep going for hours.
another fun chat.
Thank you.
Plenty more to come.
Oh yeah. So the next one will be our book chat on Thursday again, right?
Yes.
The next live stream.
Is
Yeah.
that specifically on the book, The Fifth Discipline?
It is. And if you go to the Fifth Discipline channel, you will see notes on where we intended to read to, notes on where we've talked about up to, blah, 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 blah.
Great. Well,
So
then I will read the book and get back to you on Thursday.
it's easy to catch up. You read the book, you watch the discussion from...
Based on what I've listened to so far, it sounds like you really only got through a couple chapters anyway. So
we did. And that's also in the channel. So you will be fully informed once you catch up on the channel.
Perfect.
All right, folks.
right, well,
talk to you all soon.
Thank
cheers.
you. Bye.